Hi class, and welcome to week 6. The topics that you're going to be reading about this week are learning and memory. And there's just 2 readings, 2 chapters this week. But then the discussion board activity is asking you to go out and find a couple of more articles on an area of something that you've read about in the chapters that you want to explore in more depth. We're lucky this week that we've got Hannah in our class and that she's got both some experience in neuroscience and also just a really keen interest and is excited about it. So there are no discussion responses that are technically required this week, but Hannah's going to be very involved in the discussion board this week, guiding some of our learning and contributing her experience for the benefit of the rest of the class. I'm looking forward to that. The other big project for the week is your paper that's going to be due on Sunday. And I do believe that this probably is the most challenging paper of the whole course. So I'm going to be giving you detailed feedback on your worksheets. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that here. And I'll also post a summary from week 5 for everyone. But I really strongly want to encourage you to read both the description of the assignment and also to take a look at the rubric for the assignment. You should be able to access that through the assignments area, I believe, in the Blackboard shell. If you have any trouble finding it, let me know and I can get it to you. So everybody kind of had the same challenge last week in that they're finding reading these original research studies to be a little bit boring, a little bit overwhelming. People are still struggling to figure out what's qualitative and what's quantitative. So there is an assignment due, and there are some requirements for the assignment, but I'm thinking that if you can focus on a topic, whether it's online learners or teaching English as a second language, or working with incarcerated adults, or whatever setting it is that you're working in. And you can find 3 research studies that have to do with that you think might contribute to your work with adults in that way, in those settings. You do need to show that you can understand the research and that you're understanding some of the strengths and weaknesses of the studies as they apply to practice. But if there's a way for you to make it a little bit more interesting for yourselves by actually thinking about how you would want to use this, if you were reading these 3 studies to solve a problem that you had, how would you go about evaluating them? How would you go about figuring out whether or not they would be relevant for your particular setting? I don't know if it helps you or not, but I was trying to think of an example when, as the library director, I've had to do something similar. And the most recent work that I did was really digging in to try to find out if anybody's writing about how the instructional support and resource support that the library provides contributes to student retention. And I ended up having to read really far and wide to get information about that because there aren't very many research studies that are specifically within library science that talk about the library's contribution to student retention. So I was reading, I found 2 or 3 experts that are cited again and again and again in the research, and I went back and I read some of their original publications. One of them, Vincent Tinto, I was really interested in. His original research was 20 or 30 years old, and so I was curious to know, everybody cites that research that's 30 years old. I was curious to know, what is it that he's writing about today, and does he think that the same things contribute to student retention today that he was writing about 30 years ago? And it turns out he kind of doesn't. His viewpoints have changed. So that was really interesting reading and work for me to do, even though some of the research studies I was reading had a lot of data in them. I would read through initially and just, at the introduction, I might skim the literature review to kind of see what it is that they were grounding their study in. I would go back to it later if I felt that that particular article was going to be useful for me. I looked to see how they structured their research. Were they interviewing people? Were they taking big data sets and crunching numbers? What was it that they were looking at? Was it the whole student body? Was it a small section of the student body that they were studying? And then I'd take a look at their conclusions and recommendations for additional research, and just kind of let that simmer around as I was thinking about what would be important here at CityU for the students that we work with. And contrary to the advice I've given you, I did look pretty extensively at one dissertation, because that was one of two articles that really focused on retention and the library's contribution to that. What I did find was that what that article was studying was the perception of library directors as to whether or not the work of their team contributed to student retention. So it didn't necessarily measure whether or not the library contributed to student retention, but if the library directors thought it did. So those are the kinds of things I'm imagining you might explore related to your topic and the articles that you find. As you get into that analysis part, the first part of your paper is really explaining, like, here's what the research was, here's what they were trying to find out, here's how they went about doing it. But then for the analysis part, digging into the details, which, was there a strong correlation or a weak correlation? What's the margin of error in the findings? And with that margin of error, do you believe their findings? Were they strong findings or were they weak findings? What are the weaknesses and strengths that the authors themselves identify? And how do those relate to the area in which you want to apply the research? So just try to make it as meaningful and interesting and applied for yourself as possible. Good luck. I'm available all week. You can email me if you need help, if you have questions, and I'll support you in any way I can so that this is the least stressful it can possibly be. Know that you have some fun weeks coming ahead. We're doing Learning and Memory this week. We're doing, I think, Diversity and Universal Design for Learning next week. Then I think we have a unit on multiculturalism. And so there's that. The other thing I would say for this week, it might be hard to pull in adult learning theory that you've been reading about for this particular assignment. But if there's a way to do it, if you can stretch that, and if you see a connection there somewhere, bring that in. If not, don't despair. I think bringing together the learning theories you've been reading about the last couple of weeks and the diversity, universal design, and multiculturalism will be really interesting too, so find ways to do that. So yeah, have a great week, and do reach out to me if you have any questions or need help before the paper's due on Sunday.